Welcome to the podcast, guys. Derek Smith in the house with us today, and everybody knows Joe Limon. Thank you for joining, Derek.
Thanks for having me.
On such short
Hello
notice.
there.
That's okay. Always happy to be here.
Interesting topics this week, and okay, I wanted to get right into it. I didn't talk about your run for mayor in one of my latest videos when I was talking about the Calgary mayor, the current Calgary mayor. And I mean, I think part of the reason was you and I are friends, and I didn't want to incorporate that into a video where I was totally slagging on her in particular, and that probably might seem a little bit unfair. And
that's a good call.
Yeah. So I know you want to have a clean run, and you want to have a good run for mayor, which I don't know. Will it come sooner? Will it come sooner than her? What was it? 4-year stint that she's supposed to be doing?
So yeah, she's got a 4-year mandate, just like any politician when they're brought into office. And I know you and I were talking earlier today about the petition that's going around to have her recalled. Part of the recall legislation in Alberta states that whether it's municipal, provincial, that 40% of the eligible voting public must sign that petition in order to have that person recalled. So in a city of 1.3 million people, we're probably talking maybe eligible voters, 100,000, 150,000 people would have to sign that petition.
I have the petition here. It's like, 1,200
signatures or something.
Oh, wait, no, I'll refresh it. I think it might have been more now. Wow. Okay. It's a bit more since this morning. But that's where we are with this now. I mean, it's still not even close. But that being said, you weren't planning on running sooner. You were planning on running at the normal time for the election, right?
I think preparation's the best thing when it comes to this stuff, and I will take all the time I can get, because the first thing people said when I threw my hat in the ring was, well, you don't know a damn thing about running for mayor. And I said, yeah, maybe I don't, but this gives me a chance to do some research. I've already sat down in a few meetings with some councilmen as well as their connections, and talked about plans and how we're going to move forward. And even the consensus among those folks is that we're not going to see a recall, and we're not anticipating a recall. And we're all in agreement that the more time we have to prepare this, the better, not just because of experience, but also to make sure that, we got all our ducks in a row, because we want to run a good campaign that guarantees a win almost. We don't want to get into something where we're just throwing it away for the sake of vanity or celebrity or a PR stunt, so to speak. We want this to be a serious run. So the more time, the better.
So what are you bringing to Calgary? What is a Derek Smith mayoral candidate look like?
Basically, I run on the premise, no more BS. The woke stuff has to go. In any form of politics, I'm a firm believer that, especially municipal, you're there to put forth services. You're there to ensure that your city is run properly. The woke stuff, when it comes to virtue signaling and climate crises and declaring all these things and hosing off people from protesting, that doesn't put forward policy, or it doesn't really focus our energies where they need to be in terms of making sure the citizens of the city are provided with the services they need. Especially when you talk about the stabbings that have taken place as of late, and security and police funding, which again, the mayor has been very vocal. She doesn't believe in funding the police properly. I basically just want to get rid.
She voted for defunding the police by $20 million.
Yes. So I want to do an about pace. Now, I've said very vocally that I want a full audit of the Calgary Police Service, because I don't agree with the police that went against protocol during lockdowns and abused the Charter of Rights. And their job at the end of the day is to uphold the charter and uphold the laws, regardless of who's telling them, here's your marching orders. And it's funny because when we've talked before about the police officer who met with me and gave me the vandalized copy of How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom. And
that was a cop
when he met
that
with me,
did
he's
that.
yeah, and when he met with me, he said, so essentially he reached out to me when we've sat in our interviews, or I've been in other interviews talking about Amazon throttling book sales.
Hmm.
And I said, there's words, one of the streamers from the Freedom Convoy, Church of Bubbles, had posted on Facebook that he ordered several copies. They came vandalized. And this officer caught wind of that, and he messaged me privately on Facebook and said, "Hey, look, I've got a vandalized copy, but I also have an envelope that's in perfect condition. Would you be interested in this?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "I'll replace your destroyed copy." And he says, "Oh, Amazon's already doing it. Don't worry about it." And I said, "Well, then I'll give you a signed one for taking the time to drop that off. I appreciate it." So when
Right.
he came to my home, and he met with me, he tells me he's a police officer, and he says, "I didn't want to tell you because you'd probably, have negative feelings towards that." And I said, "Well, why? Why would I care that you're a cop?" And he says, "Well, just because of the context of what you wrote in your books and, people's feelings about police through the pandemic." And I said, "I first off, I support any police officer that wants to actually do their job and uphold the law. And I'll tell you right now that anytime somebody needs the police, everybody's so quick to say defund the police, but when you need a cop, you're pretty happy to see them there."
Yeah.
So, I mean, I said to him, I respect police that, do their jobs accordingly. And he says, a lot of police in the Calgary area share the same sentiment as what you've put in this book. And he says, there are the ones that, they'll do what they're told. They're told, do this or lose your job. So they get their marching orders. And he says, a lot of us don't really agree with it. So those are the things I want an audit for when I take the mayoral seat, is that, hey, we got to weed out the cops that, don't want to follow the rules, that are known to strafe over the line, so to speak, and fund and hire police that are prepared, that whether it's me, whether it's the premier, whether it's anybody else that comes in and says, here's what I want you to do, they say that doesn't operate within the confines of the law. We're not allowed to do that. We seen that with Danielle Smith earlier this week with Archer Pulowski,
Hmm.
when he leaked the call that went on between her and
Well, we'll get into
her.
that because that's a whole other
And we'll get into
story.
that.
Yeah, that's a whole
Yeah,
thing
but
to
but
get into.
she stood firm and said, we have to respect the legal procedures. We have to respect the law in this case. And that's the same thing I want to do as mayor with the police, is say we want police that are going to act within the confines of the law, no matter what interest groups or political pundits are coming in saying do this, do that, or the other thing. It's I basically just want to return to common sense. And I think that's going to be my push.
I think people have like a love-hate relationship with the police. I mean, like nobody loves the police
Mhm.
when you've got lights in your rear view. I mean, like nobody does.
Yes.
And like
Yeah.
there's always a the fear that you're gonna run into like not a good cop, right? They're good cops or
Mhm.
bad cops. They're good everything in society. You're gonna get a good server at the McDonald's, or you'll get a bad server.
Mhm.
It's just luck of the draw, and people end up in these positions, and you hope that only the most well-intentioned people end up in these jobs, but you never 100%, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, through the pandemic, it was a lot of people, a lot of police that were carrying out orders that were unjust orders as well. So you have a mix of both of those elements, where you have uh, bad cops with bad orders doing bad
Yeah.
stuff, and that exists, but it wasn't everybody. I think during the convoy, what we did see a lot of was good cops stepping forward, but then also
Mhm.
taken off. Like there was resignations, there was people who left the country, there was people who
Yeah.
took early retirement or just went on leave during that whole time, just so that they wouldn't be put into a bad situation. So
Mhm.
that's an unfortunate thing as well. And so
Yeah.
it's a deeper dynamic than the black and white defund all the cops, defund all the
Yes.
police. I think that's just
Yeah.
ludicrous. And I I mean, like I haven't changed my opinion on that. I thought it was crazy when they were saying it 2 years ago, and it's crazy. It's crazy even now. But you know,
Yeah.
hopefully with you as
And,
mayor, you will have better policing in Calgary. Obviously, that's something that's pretty necessary at the moment, right?
and I think you hit it on the head when you said it's not black and white, and that's kind of what I want to get back to, is that everything seems lately to be black and white. It's you either stand over here or you stand over there. I think what you need to do when you're in charge of a city, when you're in charge of anything, is you have to be able to stand back and say, like you said, there are some that behave this way, or there's something going on over here. But what we need to do is be logical about it and say, let's get rid of the problem, not the whole situation, and find a way to work within the means of what's going to get work done, what's going to get people, benefiting from services, benefiting from the decisions that we make that ultimately affect their lives. And Calgary has a major seat on the world stage when it comes to oil and gas, when it comes to livable cities. I believe we're still ranked third in the world for quality of life. And I think that goes without saying that we have a lot to offer as a city, but we need to get back to what makes sense for this city in order to stay in that riding.
When it comes to the police officers, having the conversations I've had with them, there seems to be a lot of frustration as well when it
Hmm.
comes to the good officers and our judicial system.
Yeah.
They put in tremendous amount of work to find and provide evidence to prosecute in a court of law, but then the depending on which judge it's the case gets put before,
Hmm.
they have very differing levels for what constitutes reasonable doubt.
Hmm.
A good example that I have is one of my friends. They had their house broken into.
Hmm.
Um, the police knew the guy. They had lots of other evidence from other crimes that he had done. They came in, they did the whole 9 yards. They dusted for fingerprints and stuff. They found one of this guy's fingerprints on one of his vases, and they
Hmm.
were going to use that as evidence that, yeah, he was here and he broke in and he did the bad things. But then when they went and presented this evidence in an actual court, the
Hmm.
judge looked at it and said, well, you know, that vase might have been picked up at a garage sale and it maybe
Right. So
got
it's
on it that
inadmissible.
way. And
Yeah.
and it's like if you're going to judge people of that standard, my God, it'd be really hard to get anybody on anything.
Well, and part of the problem, especially in Alberta right now, that I hear about when it comes to the courts is Justin Trudeau has completely mismanaged the judicial system when it comes to penalties for crimes and um, people's abilities to get back on the street, so to speak. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of the reason we have such a big problem with the downtown situation and our transit situation with the stabbings and with people ultimately feeling scared to go anywhere is that the police don't want to process because they do all this paperwork. They have to appear in court. Some of them take their days off to go to court, and it's got to be frustrating because they do all this and meanwhile when they arrest these people they're back on the streets within 24 hours doing the same thing. So I imagine a lot of cops probably get to the point where it's why am I going to bother? They're just going to be back out here in a day and it's just going to be a waste of my time.
Yeah, people
So
people get jaded
they're
in any job where
yeah,
you're working fruitlessly.
yeah, so there needs to be a better system when it comes to uh, our justice system in general. But I mean, that's not something the mayor handles. That's something that would be pushed towards the province, to also be pushed federally. And I do think that we do need tougher laws. I think we need tougher, better jail time for certain crimes or repeat individuals. And I definitely be advocating for those things. But I definitely want to find a structure that works for police to keep them grounded as to why they're there and why it's so important that they continue to do what they do, um, while we struggle through this, because it's not just them that are struggling with it, it's the victims as well.
Hmm.
They have to deal with, like, much like your friend. Well, this guy broke into my house, he did all these things, and well, we're just going to let it go. Like, I'm sure for your friend that's very frustrating as well. So I guess the biggest problem when it comes to politics or when it comes to anything you do is that it's the one rule I was always told in business school, and that's that there's no decision you can make that's going to please everybody, and the person who tries to is a fool. I think what the job of a mayor or the job of anybody in council or anybody in any workplace should be is to focus on what's going to work for everybody, find the best ways to move policy forward, to move ideas forward where everyone can try their best to come to an agreement,
Hmm.
um, and rather than virtue signaling, rather than bringing outside politics into things, it's what's going to work to get us moving forward rather than spinning our tires in the mud, so to speak.
So being the mayor is a bit of a managerial position, and I've
Hmm.
always saw being a manager not and I've had to explain this to friends of mine that have become managers in their jobs, in different companies and whatnot. You're not there to manage the tasks. You're there to manage the people
Yeah.
who perform the tasks, and
Right.
that's really fundamentally the most important part about it. And morale is the
Mhm.
name of the game. Like, you need to bring good morale to the situation, so everybody that's in charge of a thing is happy in what they do and happy that they work for who they work for. And you know what I mean? Like, the morale is important. It's the most important thing. Like, if you have police that have poor morale, you'll have more bad police, or more reports
Mhm.
of bad police. If you have a city that has poor morale because of the police and because of the other infrastructure that's put in place, and roadworks or all these other things that you would be manager, a part and parcel along with the council, of course, but also keeping good morale within the council. I think all of this is good, and I don't see a lot of good morale around Canadian cities these days. Not
Right.
not at all. And hopefully, yeah, hopefully you can bring that to the table.
Well, I think you can get more done when you all work together. Now, the thing about city positions, and the one thing that people really take for granted when they're in those city positions, they're paid very well. They get amazing benefits, great pensions. So, I mean, look, I'd want to keep people happy, but at the same time, you got to crack the whip and tell people, like if you don't want to do your job, there's probably a lineup of people that would love to.
I worked in
So,
a union,
you
or
know,
I
you,
lived in a union town growing up. I grew up in Windsor, Ontario,
yeah,
and those guys, they're all union. They are paid so well for what they do,
yeah,
but most of them are miserable. And I remember that,
yeah,
like, how miserable a lot of people were in their jobs, even though everything that they said that they wanted, they were able to achieve, like the good
yeah,
salary, the great benefits, the great everything, great vacation time, all of that stuff. But they dragged their feet going to work, and they hated it. And that's not everybody,
yeah.
obviously, but it was a lot of
No,
people. And that's where I get back to the morale thing. And in a union
yeah,
situation, you often have this mentality and you hear it all the time. It's the managers and the union. You're always against the managers. It's the adversarial role, instead of like,
hmm,
you are part of a great organization that makes products. You know what I mean, or performs
right,
a
right.
service. I think we look more towards that. We'd probably do a better job. I don't know how you deal with a union in public works, but that's my opinion.
One thing I've noticed from councilmen in Calgary, especially when you look at more of, like, there tends to be a little, like, we don't really run on a political system here like you do in federal, where there's NDP, there's liberals, there's conservatives and whatnot. But people's characteristics and their policy shows what they're more leaning towards. And I would definitely say that we have more left leaning liberal candidates on city council right now than right leaning candidates. And what you do see, and the one thing that I think is forgotten amongst those people, is a sense of entitlement, a sense that they're allowed to be there, they're allowed to throw their weight around because they're doing it for their benefits. I've said for years that anytime you're thrown into one of these jobs, or you move forward into one of these jobs, it's because you love your city, you love your province, you love your country, and you want to serve that. And you're hired as a representative. So if I take the mayor's seat, I'm being put there by the citizens of Calgary to lead the city, to be their manager, to keep morale, but also, I'm not there for my own gains. I'm not there for, my bank account. I'm not there for any kind of grift. I'm there to benefit everyone in the city as best as I can. And that's the one thing that I think councilmen tend to forget, is that what you're doing is not only an incredible honor, but you're doing it for the people who put you there. And a lot of them in the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years have been behaving on the structure that they're there because they deserve to be there, or they're owed to be there. And a lot of the projects that they put forward, a lot of the bills that they pass are kickbacks to people who have supported them get their seats. And again, I don't agree with that. I think that when you're in that position, the people have to come first. They have to be your top priority. And we need to get back to that. It used to be the way it was, but we've got a little lost at that. So that's what I want to bring back.
Yeah, I really like the managerial sort of approach to this. I've worked for lots of companies over the years, and I've seen good and bad management styles. And
Hmm.
you want everybody on the same bus.
Hmm.
Um, You want people actively working towards it, so you can't be super harsh on them, yet at the same time you can't be super soft on them. It's a really unique skill set to be a good manager. And in all my experience, given the various leanings of the people I've worked for, some of the worst employers have been very liberal people.
Mhm.
So like you go through the interview, it sounds like a wonderful place to work, and then
Mhm.
all of
Hey,
a
they
sudden
respect
you
your
get into the
pronouns and everything, don't they?
Well,
everything, right? And then you get into the situation, and then nobody takes responsibility for anything, and when shit goes wrong, blame fingers go everywhere, and yeah,
yeah.
it's not good.
When you look at previous leadership and you look at part of the problem that I see is that I always I try to put it back to where like people say with their parents and their children. You often hear parents say, "I'm not your friend, I'm your father," or "I'm your mother," and it's the same when you're a manager. You're not there to make friends. You want to keep morale high, but you're there to manage a business, and it's the same when you're the mayor of a city. You're not there because you're going to be buddy buddy with everybody and agree with everybody. You have to find a way to work with everybody, but you're there to manage a city for people. And that's ultimately what I think has been forgotten because you look at guys like Naheed Nenshi and now Jody Gondek that spend the most of their time trying to agree with everybody and trying to make everybody happy rather than put forward beneficial policy. And that's part of the problem that has landed us to where we are. Jody Gondek calling a climate emergency in Calgary the day she stepped into office was a joke. I've
Do you have a Chinook or
I said
something
it.
that day? Like
Well,
what?
I don't know. Like that's the problem. Like Alberta, we have some of the cleanest and safest practices of energy producing in the world,
Yeah.
and we're always looking at ways of reducing carbon footprints or doing our job in a cleaner fashion. And my wife's been in the oil and gas business for 22 years, and she was like shocked when the mayor came forward and said, "I'm declaring a climate emergency." It's you're doing this to please people and special interest groups. This has nothing to do with Calgary on the whole. If you drive around Calgary, I if you compare it to other large cities, like if you compare it to New York or you compare it to Los Angeles or any of those cities, you don't see that cloud haze over top of the downtown. It's clear. You can see the mountains on any given day, provided there's no fog. You can see the mountains anywhere in town, and they're a 2 hour drive. So I don't see the air being polluted or smog or again all this devastated ground from oil sands that you see James Cameron or Leo DiCaprio talk about. Half the time, those oil sands when they're done fracking are left in better condition than when they were found. So
Yeah.
I just don't understand why we're not using our practices as a stepping stone to lead by example and say, look, we have a product, we need this product, and we do it the cleanest. So maybe we start blaming the countries that are doing it, by other detrimental ways that aren't supporting the environment.
Mm-hmm.
A good example for how clean Calgary is out of all the cities that I've seen with over 1 million people in it, the only one I would ever be willing to actually swim in the river that cuts through it is Calgary.
Yeah.
It's
It's
it's a
funny
really
because
nice, clear, clean river.
yeah, the Bow River's great. I moved here from Winnipeg when I was 15 years old, and after growing up in Winnipeg, like I love Winnipeg. I love my Jets. I've always told people my colors don't run, but when I walk around downtown Winnipeg versus downtown Calgary, one of the first things I noticed when I moved here, I went to a concert when I was 15, like about 2 weeks after I moved here, and I had to take the train. And as soon as I got off the train and took a look downtown, I just thought, God, it's clean here. Like it's just unbelievably clean. When you look at Pedro Pascal, who was just here filming The Last of Us, he's done interviews saying he wants to buy a home near Calgary because he couldn't get over how clean it was and how great it was to walk around this part of the world and see natural beauty in its own like its own element. You don't get that in a lot of metropolitan areas, and that's why it's laughable at best when folks like Jody Gondek come forward and say, "Well, we're declaring a climate emergency." Whatever you're smoking, can you tell me where to get some? Because boy, it must do wonders for you.
What sort
I
of
don't get it.
what sort of disconnect do people have where they can't recognize that like it's good here? You know, like
I think part of the
you go around the
problem,
world, especially like go travel, go to Mexico,
yeah,
go check out there, go to the Philippines, go to, and I'm not singling out these places for anybody who's watching, but like go to other countries and see how it is there, and how the quality of air, the quality of, you know, the stuff all over the streets, the water polluted, all of that stuff. And a lot of places in Canada are crisp, clean. Like
yeah,
it's amazing. Like even Vancouver is a nice, clean city.
gorgeous.
It's a
Yep.
yeah. Just don't drive there because the roads
Yeah,
suck, and
takes a while.
it's terrible planning. But yeah, no, it's yeah, the Fraser River, super clean. All of this, it's a beautiful place to go, and there's so many beautiful places in Canada. To think that we need to be on the hook for some catastrophe that's happening. If anything, we should be, like you said, an example to the rest of the world, an example to China, how we can do
Yeah,
industrious things and still not be China. You know?
right. It's funny because when you look at carbon footprints by country, I think Canada only contributes 1.8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Yet we're taxing farmers and pulling back their fertilizer use and dismantling our oil and gas industry to bring in oil from Saudi Arabia. Where like look, I sat with a gentleman from Iraq uh, about a month ago at a media event, and he says he's been in Canada for a few years, but he says when you see like Abu Dhabi or any of those sections of the world where they've got these gorgeous skyscrapers like Dubai, he says, where do you think all the money that came to build those buildings, or the people who drive Ferraris everywhere and stuff and have Rolex watches? He says it was all built off of oil. He says the people over there laugh at places like Calgary or like Alberta and say, look at them squandering their oil industry. They could be just like us, you know, and all in the sense of virtue signaling on the Paris Accord. I don't understand why, again, we're not leading by example saying, look, we could reduce China's carbon footprint. We could reduce Saudi Arabia's footprint if they use the same practices we use, because we're only emitting 1.8% versus 20 or 30% like China does.
Mm-hmm.
On this topic, I've been asking people, and I want your opinions on it. Recently, all of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Russia, etc., these major oil producing countries, they're all starting to sign on to the BRICS, and dropping the US petrodollar, right?
Yeah.
My question for you, though, uh, is this going to help Alberta if some of the only oil and gas that you can purchase with the US petrodollar, or what exists of it, will be from Canada?
Well, it's going to depend on a lot of things because there's a lot that goes into that. Anytime mass groups follow one plan like that, I always say follow the money. You got to follow what the benefit is for them doing that. When you look at the U.S., when Trump wanted to put through Keystone XL, a lot of people in Alberta were jumping up and down and cheering. And I said, "Why are you guys happy?" And they said, "Well, we're getting our pipeline." It's the U.S. is basically robbing us with that pipeline. They're getting the deal of a lifetime because they're going to get our oil for cheap and then sell it back to us at a ridiculous profit. Um, so, I mean, if it goes the way it's looking like it might go, I don't know. Is it going to mean more for Alberta? Perhaps, but the question is what kind of deal are we going to get to benefit Alberta for that? You'd have to have a government in place similar to somebody like Danielle Smith, who's willing to put their foot down and say you can have a pipeline to the U.S. or to the Gulf, but these are the terms and conditions for resale, or these are the terms and conditions for output. Um, if you're going to have somebody like Jason Kenney, who is more of a federalist, who wants to allow those pipelines to go through at a ridiculous loss to the province, well, it's not going to benefit Alberta. We'll be pumping out oil, but while people will be busy working, we just won't be seeing the benefits as a province financially. So there needs to be a balance, I think, if we're going to see
I'm going to
that.
put a little bit of pushback on that. Um, the provincial budget is largely bolstered by the sale of oil and gas. So
Hmm.
even if we aren't putting as much value as we could generate out of it by manufacturing our own plastics and end products here.
Mhm.
We're still pulling value into the country by exporting it.
We
The net
are.
positive.
And that's
Um,
and that's true, but my question is that it's similar to um I, I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a kid with a lemonade stand, and the kid's on the corner selling his lemonade for 5 cents a glass, and there's a man walking down the street who's dying of thirst. He's completely dehydrated. Now, not to say lemonade would hydrate him,
mhm,
but he's thirsty as hell. And he comes walking down the street just looking for a drink, and he sees this kid with a lemonade stand, and all he has in his pocket is a $5 bill. Now, he doesn't look at the price of 5 cents for that lemonade. He just says, I've got $5. I'll take a glass of lemonade. And he slams the $5 bill down, prepared to pay that, because to him, that's what it's worth. Now, the kid gives him back $4.95 in change, and he walks away laughing, saying, well, I got my lemonade and it only cost me a nickel instead of the $5 that was in my pocket. The problem at the end of the day is that something's worth what someone's willing to pay for it. And that's where negotiations need to come into place. I'm not saying that we won't turn a profit putting through a pipeline or something like Keystone XL. We would see our profit go up, but part of the problem is that we still have um, our royalty rates that we pay to other provinces, our
mhm,
equalization, I should say.
sure.
Um, we still have money going out. If the province wanted to make more money for itself, when you talk about Alberta independence, even or people wanting to split, if the province were to make more money selling the
Mhm.
same product by having tougher negotiations, I think we'd be in a better spot. Now, will we benefit if OPEC producers move to other places and get rid of the petroleum dollar? Yes. I think Alberta will start to benefit because you're going to start to see gas become so unaffordable that people bringing it in from other parts of the world, whether it be the government of Canada or the United States, they'd have to turn to Canada. We have one of the second, I think it's the second largest oil reserve in the world. Um, they'd have no choice. But it's, are we going to give it away or are we going to sell it for what it's worth? Is the question.
Yeah, well, the problem with Alberta oil, in terms of trying to get the most bang for your buck for it, is since we're not a coastal province,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to get it out and maximize the number of people actually competing for it.
Right.
So, a truly strong economy for Alberta would be one where we could have our pipeline down south, where we could also have a pipeline out east where we can put it on
Absolutely.
tankers in the Great Lakes, another one out
Absolutely.
west where we can put it on tankers in Vancouver, and
There's
just
also the option
maximizing the.
option of having one up north, right? That was Danielle
Yeah.
Smith was talking about that.
Uh, was it
Yeah.
north or was it Manitoba? It's
There
kind of
was there was
north.
one that was supposed to go north ages ago and it got shut down.
Yeah, I thought it was like
Yeah.
up
Um,
north and out through like the Hudson Bay. Like so you'd have
Yeah.
yeah,
tankers
Okay.
going out
yeah,
that way.
Yeah.
yeah.
That one would be another potentially great option. There's no infrastructure currently with a massive harbor that could support it, but that is
Yep.
definitely something you could work towards,
Yeah.
Yep.
and
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
maximizing it that way.
And
You
in
look at
that
the deal that we just killed
situation,
with Germany.
in that
Hmm.
situation though, you would like Derek was saying, it's the price that people want to pay.
Hmm.
If the oil can go this way or that way or that way, you have options in the directions that you're going to send how much you're going to flow out, and
Hmm.
Yeah.
it goes to the highest bidder. I mean, this is capitalism 101. I mean, that's how it
Hmm.
goes. But I think that the petrodollar being lost as a common denominator around the world is going to have serious effects on the economy. I mean, the US dollar,
Absolutely.
there's so many people that are holding US dollars only because a, a way of paying for stuff. If they don't need
Hmm.
that anymore, all those dollars come home to roost. They've been printing them for a long time. If they
Yeah.
all start coming back all in a big hurry, and
Hmm.
with the debt that the United States currently has, um,
Hmm.
how are they going to avoid not having a hyperinflation type scenario?
Well, and that's again where I talk about the thirsty guy walking down the street, right? I'm picturing the US coming to Canada saying we need a deal.
Hmm.
Their dollar has been almost like clockwork, 30 cents above the dollar in Canada for the last 6 years. So just like the housing market, when you talk about at some point that's going to decrease, it's going to burst. And with inflation and the debt they're carrying, I think you're going to see that happen probably within the next 2 to 3 years, especially once the next presidential election hits. I think you're going to see a big change either up or down in their dollar, because government dictates a lot of how the dollar is going to go in terms of infrastructure, jobs, how they're going to balance their budgets. Um,
Mhm.
if the petroleum dollar is a concern, well then it's anyone's game to see where the market goes. But I think when that happens, like I said, I'm not saying that Alberta's not going to benefit from any kind of switch in the oil industry. I think that again, what has to happen is what are we giving away and at what price? It's I kind of touched on it a second ago. You look at the LNG, liquid natural gas deal we just blew with China and with Germany. Like we just threw it out the window because we had people coming to Canada saying we need gas, we need natural gas, and Justin Trudeau said, "Hey, look at this manufacturing plant for was it an automotive manufacturing plant? He took that, I can't remember, but he took them to a manufacturing plant of some sorts
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Look at all these great things we do for the environment. No, we don't have any natural gas for you." And we're abundant in it, and we were supposed to have a huge LNG project going out to the West Coast that
Yeah.
got shut down right when Trudeau took office.
Mhm.
And again, I know a lot about that project because my wife worked on it for several years.
Mhm.
It's
We have
huge loss.
natural gas deposits that are so massive that we can't tap into them right now because our material science hasn't advanced to the point where you could reliably extract from it without
Mhm.
wearing out the metal that exits the hole, essentially.
Mhm.
Like when we tapped into them, we had half a dozen or so flare towers just to measure how much gas was in it. And when we tapped it, like these are massive, like 6 to 8 meter diameter burning towers that you just spray straight natural gas into and ignite
Mhm.
it so it doesn't cause an environmental disaster. And we had like
Yes.
6 of them just for that one deposit. And I believe we have a couple of them at least. And
That's the It's kind of the thing with liquid natural gas though, is that it's much like pipelines for oil. It's the safest way they have found to transport natural gas.
mhm,
And it's one of the most effective ways to transport natural gas. Yet you have these morons in government that are championing things like electric cars that are exploding, and their battery systems that cost, oh, your engine went dead, well, that's going to be $25,000 to replace it. And people say, well, everybody get electric cars. It's like, why aren't you championing LNG or again, clean fracking practices? Like, I don't understand this banana republic
So
of
there
nonsense.
there are cottage industries coming about, and they're slow to come around, but they are happening. And so, for example, like Tesla batteries, uh when they say that it's done, when the machine says, oh, you can't use this, warning, battery's no good, they're like maybe a handful of cells that are no longer good in the whole battery. and,
Yeah.
and there's a whole industry coming about of people that are refurbishing these batteries. Tesla doesn't want to do it, and that's their prerogative. They just, we sell cars, we don't sell repairs, so they'll hold up on some of the repairs, but if you need a battery, it's the whole thing or nothing, right? And that's, yeah,
Yeah.
20 grand. That is a ridiculous price for that. But there are people that are doing refurbs on these batteries now, and that's the kind of thing that you will see in the industry moving forward, and it will become more viable. The big problem with electric cars is, well, two main major things is weather. You can't use them in extreme colds. It's an unfortunate thing, and there may be different things that we can implement in infrastructure and things like that to use electric transport. I mean, trains, they still work in the cold, but they're not. There's not batteries in them. But then, yeah, like the other issue is the fact that the minerals just aren't available to make the
Right.
amount that are going to be in demand if we all switch to electric because of some government decree. And we just won't be able to keep the demand up. So that's just going to push people more and more into the used car market. And
Mhm.
instead of advancing technologies, which are every year they're cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, these cars. The old days of the old smog producing automobiles are over, and efficiency is going up exponentially. It's huge, and cars, they're so clean. I mean,
Mhm.
there is a really good practical use for electric cars. I think they're amazing. I mean, like, have you been in a Tesla? Have you driven one?
Um, I've seen one demoed. I've never actually driven one, but
You
I've
would want one. Let me
looked at them.
tell
Like
you
I go to
that.
the car show every year. I've sat in one. I've just never driven in one.
Yeah, if you didn't live in
We usually check them
Calgary,
out at the
where
car
it would
shows and stuff.
probably show you a 20% charge in the middle of the winter after
Yeah.
sitting on the
If,
thing, like in Vancouver, it makes sense. Like
yes.
out here, a lot of people have them, and man, do they go! They go like snot. They're fun to drive. They really
Yeah.
are, and they got
Yeah.
no gears, so they just woo. But if that's not convenient for your lifestyle, then it's just a dumb car. You know,
And that's just it. If I lived in like Seattle or somewhere where I was just commuting and around town kind of thing, people talk about Los Angeles or something. I always go, well, your biggest problem is your congestion
Mhm.
and being
yeah,
stuck on the roads if you run out of juice. You've seen those 3-hour lineups for people to charge their cars, and
yeah, that's
I
ridiculous.
think, yeah, the population density is a little too high for that out there. But um, again, if you live somewhere like Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, or somewhere on that West
Or
Coast,
even in the burbs of
or even
those
Vancouver,
places. Actually, the
yep,
burbs are probably the
yep,
better places. So like I live
absolutely,
outside of Vancouver. I'm not gonna say exactly where I live. Some people know, but like I live outside of Vancouver, and
yep,
there's all the infrastructure is on these highways, and it doesn't matter where you live.
yep,
You're gonna be near a charger somewhere,
yep,
and they're almost never packed. And yeah, yeah,
right,
this is the thing. So like, I I I think electric cars are great technology, and it's funny because I rail on it, but people don't get the nuance. Like everything is not black and white. There's good
hmm,
practical uses for technology, and then there's the trying to blanket everybody should have it, and it's like it doesn't work.
yeah,
One of the things that I think is a really easy win for any sort of person running for any office is not really trying to choose sides on the green energy versus fossil fuel energy, but instead just adopting a stance of being pro energy,
hmm,
uh, trying to get as many different of these technologies into people's hands as cheaply as possible.
yeah,
Let the market dictate what people actually see value in and what people are willing to pay for.
hmm,
Um, a lot of people rip on oil and gas because a lot of the oil and gas companies over the years have negotiated themselves large subsidies in order to maintain development within their constituencies, etc.
yeah,
Um, that that's fine. Those that brings investment into the area and brings
hmm,
taxable revenue.
yeah,
Um, and the same thing can be said for providing subsidies for green energy, whatever it
absolutely,
may be, as long as at the end of the day there's a customer base willing to pay for it,
hmm.
then it's not energy or it's not financial investment lost. It's not
Well,
like
supply and
you're
demand,
going
right?
forward and saying, hey, nobody's stepping up and doing this fast enough, so the city of Calgary is going to go out and purchase another wind farm or solar farm or whatever to
Mm,
provide power. No, that's not right. It should be
no,
private capital, and if possible, reduce taxable revenue.
right. So I've always been one of the same cloth where I've said, look, I'm all for alternative energy sources because first off, with the regulation of electricity, especially in Calgary, people pay an arm and a leg when it comes to their utilities. So if they found alternative means, and my wife and I have looked at alternative means because like when they started talking about Tesla shingles and things like that, we started saying, oh well, maybe we take a look at some of those things because Calgary has been said to have, I guess, on record the most sunny days in Canada or something. They unleashed that statistic a couple of years ago. So I said, well, if we have the most sunny days, it would make sense to have shingles like that bring in energy and save a little bit on our bills. The problem is when it comes to oil and gas, it's something we're going to need. Everything we use today is a byproduct of oil. When you look at your cell phones, polyester jackets, your your cars, your lights in your home, everything is a byproduct of oil and gas. So what a lot of people are doing when they're pushing this narrative of we got to go green, it's that they're not acknowledging that we want to look at alternative sources, but at the same time we have to accept that this is the inevitability of what we need in order to move forward as the human race. That we've evolved over times, and we're dependent on these resources. But what's best to do is focus on the safest and cleanest way to use them, while looking into effective ulterior or alternative sources. And that's I'm all for it. Like, you see people driving Teslas in Calgary, not as much as when I was in Vancouver. And I mean, every second time you blink, like there's another Tesla on the road.
Yeah, half of them are fart
But
sniffers though. Like people like, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like there are
but
people that it's like that's the thing to do. Like that is the thing
I'm
to
starting
be.
to
It's
notice, like,
the prestige thing, but like they do make
right.
sense. They do make sense for a lot of people's lifestyle.
Yeah. So like when I take the kids to the mall or something to go pick up clothes or whatever, like I'll notice like there's more Teslas in the charging spots there for the Tesla cars than there used to be. We're starting to increase our numbers of things like that, but again, it's the effectiveness of a Tesla in a city that has snow 4 to 6 months out of the year, right? It
Yeah.
just doesn't make economic sense when you're paying 120 grand for one of those cars, and you're not going to get a full charge out of them. You're not going to get the full benefit. But again, I've often said those are the stepping stones to a better energy source in the future. It's just when you look at the Ford Model Ts that first came out as cars, the old wind up transmissions with the crank, like we're not still using those cars. We've evolved our cars over 100 and some odd years. So I mean, it's going to be the same when it comes to electric vehicles, that the first design is not going to be the best design. We're going to improve as time goes on. But what we have to do is find a balance again to say this is going to be where we want to research, but at the same time we still have to use oil and gas moving forward. So how do we do
Absolutely.
it in a safe?
Absolutely. I think oil and gas it should be a part of the equation always. Right? This is
Absolutely.
it's a form of energy. It's abundant. There's more of it than we previously thought. You know, the whole bell curve never took place. That didn't happen. And but the thing is, like, people are hungry for other alternative technologies, and I think and when it comes to the subsidies and stuff, I'm actually really pro subsidies. For example, like a subsidy, and what I mean by a subsidy is like a rebate or a grant or something like that. When people, say for example, want to buy a battery bank for their house, you said you were talking about the solar power thing. Well, solar power is
shingles.
yeah, solar power is one thing. I mean, that's a pie in the sky idea, to have solar panels everywhere, and that's gonna like be all the power we ever need. It's not, that's never gonna happen. But it's not that we can supplement our energy needs with solar, some forms of wind. I don't know about these turbines that they're putting up. It seems like there's more damage to them, and like from start to finish, they consume more energy than they actually produce. They you know, if you look into all of the stuff that goes into it, say for example, killing all the birds, it's a net negative for a lot of people, the idea of these ones. But that's not to say that there aren't other designs that have come about that could harvest wind without all the damage. But that being said, if we were to, you know, give grants for people who want to put battery banks in their homes, this actually offsets a lot of so the big problem with solar and wind is, well, we're not using the power when we're generating it, and then it's lost to the grid, right? We need capacitance in the system if we're going to make that viable at all, and be able to use it.
And California is doing that right now with a lot of residents that do these solar on their homes. They're selling what they're not using back to the electric companies to avoid blackouts on grids for things like the mass purchasing of electric vehicles in town. So,
but power that goes into the grid and isn't used is lost. Like
Yes.
you don't just make power and then you just like circle it around in the wires, and when somebody needs it they pull it out. Like
Right.
it's lost, it's dissipated if it's not consumed. So we always have to, you know, keep things on standby to fire things up when it's needed, and tone down when it's not needed, or else we're just wasting energy, creating heat essentially. So capacitance is a big issue in that thing, and the more and more people get on board and get on the grid with a level of capacitance with these battery banks in their homes, you can actually add capacitance to the system, which makes things like solar and wind a little bit more viable. Because typically, and Germany's learning this lesson the hard way after getting rid of all their nuclear energy, they need natural gas to fire up turbines for when there's no wind and when there's no sunshine. And guess what? Winter has a whole little of both of those, at least for a lot of countries.
And what's funny about a lot of this is that a lot of this circumvents policy and government policy. But when you talk to the average person, at least anytime I talk to anybody around my neck of the woods, uh, you don't see as many people. It's not an environmental thing. It's not people that are concerned about, well, I don't want to leave as big of a carbon footprint. It's people saying, I can't afford the current price of fuel. I can't afford the price of electricity. I can't afford my natural gas. I can't afford the. I mean, Clyde, you work as a mechanic full time. So a lot of people tell me I can't afford the maintenance charges to constantly take my vehicle in every 2 or 3 times a year for $700-800 a pop. It's people desperate to find a way to save money. So I spoke with a gentleman. I used to work for a car dealership, and I spoke to a gentleman
I'm
at one
sorry.
point. I worked for a luxury, right? I worked for Infinity at one point, and a gentleman came in who said he was going to get rid of his I believe it was a CX-90 or whatever the SUV is, and he said, I'm gonna trade it in and get a Tesla. And one of the guys behind the desk said, well, good luck with a 120 grand bill. And he says, okay, but this vehicle cost me $85,000. And he says, and every time I come in here, it's $700 for a maintenance. I got to pay 100 and some odd dollars every time I fill my tank, which is usually about once every 8 or 9 days. So he says, if you add all that up, when I'm paying 120,000 for a Tesla, where everything's under warranty, aside from wearable parts like tires, and he says, all I do is plug it in and go. I don't have to worry about the price of gas. I don't have to worry about maintenance. I don't have to worry about any of the shortcomings that come from owning one of these vehicles. I'm making back that $700-800 every time I come in here for maintenance, every time I plug in that vehicle. And it's like, well, he's kind of got a point, right? Like when you're putting the margins between an $85,000 car and a $120,000 car, it makes sense. But it's the efficiency again of living in Calgary trying to use that vehicle. But this is a man who bought a luxury vehicle who's looking at, how am I saving money? Now, Manitoba's been using hydroelectricity since God knows when. I mean, when I lived there, we were using it then, and that's what powers their city grid. And a lot of it, like anytime I sit with people when I'm visiting back home and I talk about utility costs, like people say to me, well, how come we've got a hot tub in our backyard, and people say, well, why do you always drain it during the winter? And I said, well, the one winter we kept it full, I got a heating bill in January for $700.
Oof.
And I'm sorry to say it, but we don't use it enough to justify $700 a month. And I don't know anybody who can. That's more than a car payment just to turn on your lights and heat a hot tub. So we drain it every winter, and our bills are cut in half.
Yeah.
And I look at that going, this is when you talk about lockdowns during COVID and people saying what's required or things that are mandatory. Electricity is one of them. And part of what convinced me to run for mayor was an article last year. I jokingly said to my wife, I should run for mayor at some point. But at that point, I had no voice in the world. I had no stance in politics. But there was an article that came out last winter that talked about families with the carbon tax hikes that were sitting in Calgary in -30. and they were sitting in their homes in ski pants and winter jackets because they were afraid to touch their thermostat. They basically kept their heat just high enough that their pipes don't freeze. And the family with children are sitting in their houses in snow pants and winter jackets because they can't afford a higher bill. That's disgusting. And that's where you got to get away from the environmental. That's what a lot of these pundits and bureaucrats often do, is they point the finger at the environment side of things and say, but this is the cost of doing these things. No, those are the costs you're charging us to have those services that we shouldn't be paying as much for. At the end of the day is the problem. It's the regulation or deregulation of electric, of natural gas. And again, especially in Alberta, when we're so abundant in it, now I know Ralph Klein screwed the province on that years ago when he deregulated electricity. But something's got to change. It's a lot of people that, again, it's not for them. It's not the environment, it's cost. And I think that's where the change has to come. Again, it's the people's jobs in office to put forward policy for environment or policy to get better things when it comes to oil and gas versus electric versus everything else. But I think for the average person, what it is what's going to affect my bank account. And that's where we got to focus on the benefits for the average person.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Totally. So Derek, we're going to change subjects here.
Mm-hmm.
You and I
wait.
Oh, you want to add some more
it.
before? Okay, go for it.
Can you pull something up?
I can show it. Send me the link.
I shared it in the Discord. This is how awesome Alberta is.
Just the image?
Yeah.
Hold on, it's on the wrong page here. Let's get this up here. What am I on? Get out of town, really? A coal-powered Tesla.
Yep.
There you go.
Isn't that is that true? Is that true? Do you guys actually have coal-fired plants in Alberta for your energy? How's your energy produced? Well, you don't even know. We don't know how energy is produced.
No.
Well, the problem
turbines.
is they've changed it over the last few years because of Trudeau, and I know a lot of places have been shut down. So it depends. At the capacity, I'm not sure we used to, but at what capacity today, I'm not sure. That would be all northern Alberta.
Because out here in British Columbia, it's like hydro. Hydro is like everything. There's so much hydroelectricity being generated because we have it. We have water way up here, and we have cities and towns way down here.
Yeah, there's a lot of turbine plants that have been set up, so I think it's a combination of coal and turbine now.
Yeah, southern Alberta used to have a lot of coal being extracted in it.
Yeah,
and that's basically all been shuttered. There's a lot of ghost towns now.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting thing. So our old premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, who was instrumental in keeping LNG out of the province because he just wants to care about that environment, right? Well, he retired and he left everything to David Eby, who's happy to continue in his footsteps of just ruining the province. But he retired and now he's sitting on a board of the coal industry. It's like, okay.
Conflict of interest much?
Well, and he said in an article, he said to some news agency, he said, I understand why people would knee-jerk reaction, think that this is a conflict of interest, but you need to understand that coal is no longer used for thermal. It's now just used in the steel industry domestically.
Yeah,
I don't
had to say
believe
domestically because all the rest of it we ship off to China.
I don't think anybody in any form of politics has any business sitting on any boards so long as they're serving the public. That is
no. He retired and then got that job.
Yeah, okay,
but that's how he got it. He got it because he did them all
part
a
of the
favor
problem
by keeping LNG out.
That's been part of the problem in Calgary. I think, that's not mine. I think in Calgary they had, so at one point when Nenshi was mayor, I don't know, I think one of them retired, but two of our councilmen were sitting on the board for NMAX, which is our electric and utility company, that were also on city council. And that's a huge conflict of interest because of the deregulation of electricity. you can't do that, right? But they allow it. They say, well, we don't have any loopholes for that, or we don't have any stipulations. I don't think it should be permissive. I think if you're in any position like that, it's you should have to recuse yourself from one of them. You either don't take the seat on council or you get off the board. But
What do you think's the biggest conflict of interest that any politician in Canada has right now?
Rachel Notley with her husband,
That's what I was
think.
thinking as well. Her husband on the board of Coop.
the Coop. Yep.
That's
Huge conflict
so
of interest.
disgusting.
And she's come forward several times, even when she was premier, and said, "Oh, there's no conflict of interest." But you're the NDP. You guys fund Medicare or medical more than anything else, and your husband just so happens to be in a high position with that. Give me a break. Like that's the definition of conflict of interest.
He's using the incomes of people in that industry to sponsor her re-election campaign advertising.
Yep. Well, and it's funny because like she's blocked me on Twitter, but I still see a lot of her posts, which is really weird. And a lot of people who have been blocked by her seeing her tweets and saying, why is it all of a sudden that all these politicians that have blocked tweets are coming into our feeds on Twitter? That doesn't make any sense. And I'm not sure if that's something to do with Twitter settings or
I think that's just an
for.
engagement thing.
Is it really?
They see a certain segment of the population tends to engage more with these people, so then they push the content to them. Like the average NDP supporter is not going to comment on something Notley posts, but if Notley posts something that's stupid, there's going to be a lot of conservatives posting on there.
Well, and it's so funny because you see representatives like Janice Irwin who constantly post all these attacking tweets. Like they'll post something like, "Oh, I went out this weekend with my dog," and comments are turned on. But as soon as they go, Danielle Smith is anti-LGBT and all this, like all of a sudden you see, "Oh, comments are turned off." How convenient, right? Like I think we need tougher rules when it comes to social media engagement, like the U.S., where it's illegal to shut that down or to block people when you're when you're a political representative. I think these guys, the problem is everybody cares about their feelings too much on Twitter, and they need to start saying, hey, you know what, if I'm in the limelight, I'm gonna have to put up with some criticisms. But
I currently don't block
we'll
anybody. It's funny. I just I don't do it. And it's
I've blocked a few.
Yeah, you've blocked a few. I've been
blocked a few and made mistakes.
I've been tempted to block people, but I found if I just hit the ignore or what was it, the mute button, then they just don't show up in my feed. I don't care if other people see me and hate watch me. I think it's funny.
And that's the thing. Like I've only been on Twitter for less than a year, and I don't know a lot about how it works. So like in my mind, it was the same as something like Facebook, where like at first if somebody was getting on my nerves, it's like, I'll just block them. I don't want to hear from them anymore. And then people would say, oh, you're blocking people. You shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, well, I just don't want to listen to them anymore. And they go, well, then put the mute button on. And it's like, oh, there's a mute button. Okay, that's what that means. So
when you block somebody, it stops them from being able to view your page,
see your tweets.
Yeah,
right. So I've stopped blocking people since learning a little bit about mutes and how those work. But
when you mute somebody, they can continue to like post on your stuff, and you never see it, and then you find out later, like, oh man, that guy comments on every single one of your posts.
He throws it in there all the time. Yeah.
Okay, living rent free in people's heads is fun, sometimes.
Right? It is fun. It's quite entertaining.
Another thing, just small thought here. I'm not sure how many of these politicians actually run their social media pages. So generally, when the blocks actually come through, I don't think many of them actually know and or care. It's the people running them that get offended or triggered.
So with Rachel Notley, I've noticed a trend that anybody in Alberta who has a stronger following, like I'd say more than 1,000 followers to 2,500, are almost, as long as they're commenting on her tweets and they're against what she's putting forward, it's almost an automatic block, because they don't want anybody with influence or followings to be able to comment and pull people away during election time, I guess. So I know like Wexit Barbie, in Alberta. She's got a big account. I think she's
Waxit
40 or
Barbie.
50,000 followers. Yeah, her tweets are great.
I'll
But
have to check her out.
she's been blocked.
What a name!
I think she
though.
got blocked the day after I did from Notley, but because we were going back and forth laughing about it. But there's been a lot of folks in Alberta with. I know Marty got blocked by Notley, and a few.
Mhm.
I think Janice Irwin is one of the few NDPs that haven't blocked me yet, but I'm well on my way. I take it like a badge. I want to get that block, so I'll
Marty, he decided to block all the PPC bras because he got into it with it on Twitter. Twitter is
had
a
enough.
battleground, right? Like even Elon Musk said, like,
It's so toxic.
if you don't don't enter the battleground if you don't want to get hurt, right?
Yeah.
but yeah, Marty was just, he's done with it. He's like, I'm done with the PPC bras. I didn't want to talk to them anymore. And it's weird because like I think I see it on all sides. I see it on all sides. You have like the diehards that like there's no discussing it. They've got all their things that they're gonna throw at you, and it doesn't matter what you say. I mean, it's not a discussion anymore. Like it's not an open-minded discussion where we're contemplating ideas and we might be swayed either way. No, it's just like yell. Nobody's changing any minds. So I find those conversations to be a waste of time.
Right. But Clyde, didn't you hear? There's people that are wrong on the internet.
Yeah, it keeps me up every night, right? But I like discussion. I like disagreeing with people, but when it gets to the point that you just end up in circular arguments over and over with people, and like you get the PPC bras that are just like, Poilievre's WEF, and there's no convincing them otherwise. And it's okay. Well, Poilievre has his merits and he has his downsides too, and but so does Maxime Bernier. I had the guy on the channel twice. Great guy, follows me. I follow him back. We agree on so much and all this stuff, and I love discussing with him. But I'm not 100% on board with anybody, right? And I think that's the way to be. Always be kind of open to hear another side of the story and be willing to be swayed. As long as you're always willing to be swayed, I think you're doing it right, in my opinion. And I struggle with it too.
Well, we don't know everything, right? I'm no expert on everything. So, I mean, I'm always willing to be educated if somebody wants to explain something to me. But one of the things I think people forget about on Twitter is the ability to agree to disagree. And I find myself constantly especially since announcing the mayoral run, I find myself really struggling to decide sometimes how much do I want to discuss what this person's talking about to a certain degree, because you'll answer their question and it'll be something similar to what you said about Poilievre being with the WEF, is that it doesn't matter how much you clarify something, you're always in the wrong. So it's, well, okay, now I got to back off and just stop answering. And they'll come back with, oh, see, I made my point because you want to answer me. And it's like, no.
You little bitch.
I don't want to waste my time. I only got so many hours in the day, man. I got to move on, right?
Yeah,
so it's fun.
One thing that I think has helped out for me a lot in interacting with other people is I don't approach it as I or them have to be persuaded. It's to me, I always try to approach it as if I'm going to be interacting with this person, I probably won't sway them on anything serious.
Yeah.
But can I gain anything by understanding their perspective?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And that makes me a lot more open to conversations I otherwise disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side, the positive interactions I have, those people are more likely to actually hear what my perspective is if I'm not actively trying to say, no, you're wrong about this because this.
Yeah.
And it's a tact you can take.
Yeah, I always, if I ever find myself in a position where I think I'm talking to somebody who's just rooting for their home team, you know what I mean? It's like the tribalism, rah, my guy good, you guy bad. Or, I mean, I don't even have a guy. You know what I mean? I don't have a guy. Like, but people will straw man you and say who your guy is for you. and they want that like us versus them stuff. For me, it's like, if you like that, go go root for the local sports team or something like that.
Yeah.
I think politics has a little too much at stake to be rah. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
take the time and figure out what's going on.
Well, and like you said earlier, it's not all black and white, right? You got to stop saying it's this or that. It's there's an abundance of things in any situation that you have to take a look at if you're going to come to a reasonable decision on how to move forward. The ways of the internet seem to dictate these days that it needs to be black and white. And I think what we need to do is start seeing things in color, so to speak, and saying, well, there's a little more to it than what you're coming across with. But both sides can be wrong on something. And if they work together, I find they can come to a pretty decent solution if they're willing to hear each other out and discuss it properly.
Here's another one. Both sides can be right, but right for different reasons.
That's right.
And that's a hard one for people to swallow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I'm going to switch topics here. I'm going to get into
Let's do it.
Something else that comes in color, all kinds of colors, and that's well, the reason why I know you, Derek. So the reason why I even know you in the first place is all those months ago you sent me a message on to my email, and you said, hey, I'm writing this.
Don't tell people about me catfishing you. I don't know. Hey, listen.
Me, and I was waiting at the train station all night, and no, so I got a message from you saying, I'm writing a book, and would this be something you'd be like to endorse? And then I said, well, I replied, yeah, of course, sure, send it to me when it's done. And well, that book ended up being a #1 bestseller for a good chunk of time. We got a picture of it here. How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom, written by Derek Smith, illustrated by Kaide Naip. And well, that's how you and I got to know each other. And I promoted your book, and I'm not responsible for it. I gave you a little boost, but it was the book itself that did well because of what it was.
Right? I always say it's your community, I think, that was responsible for a lot of it, because your community came out in droves and supported that book and pushed it. And yeah, kudos to them.
Yeah, community's awesome. Really awesome community around here. Really, thoughtful and good people. But it was also, really good timing. You came out with a book pretty quick after the events of what went down in well, just tell me about it. Just I mean, I know about it, but you can tell the audience a little bit about what the book's about.
Well, I mean, the book essentially was a parody. Like, here's the thing. Justin Trudeau had so many gaffes go on between the paper drink box water bottle things and the people kind references and stuff. Like, we had the well was abundant in material. And I kept thinking, I want to do like a play on an adult style book drawn like a children's book that just makes fun of the Prime Minister. Because I think with the visual aid, you can really sell some of those jokes. And when it came to the Freedom Convoy, I looked at that and said, look, from a business standpoint, I looked at it and said, we have to move a product. And this is a group of people that raised $10 million twice in a matter of 2 weeks. So there's people that support this. There's people that are interested in it. And I mean, I donated to the Freedom Convoy. I believed in what the convoy has, and I've since become very close friends with some of the folks that were involved in that convoy, and I still stand behind what they did and think that it was fantastic. But I wanted to put out a product that showcased the convoy and showcased the Prime Minister and really took a jab at him, because I think that when you look at the reaction of the convoy, when you look at the villainization of fundraising through Give Send Go and well, I guess GoFundMe technically, people being trampled by horses, the Emergency Act, everything that went on in there. When you put out something in a comedic stance like this, and Preston Manning put it best when I spoke with him after the book went #1. He says, you've kind of taken the stance of the court jester in Canada, that the court jester was always immune to making fun of the king, because that was the position he was given to entertain people. And you've kind of done that with Trudeau, because he can't villainize this book like he did with the convoy, because it's satirical, but it's also being widely accepted by people. And I said, well, I'm worried I'm going to get sued, or I'm worried that, he's going to kick a bunch of dirt up at it. He says, as soon as he does, it's just going to give you more sales, and it's
Yeah.
going to give you more attention. And that's what makes this such a great thing, he said, is that you found a way to put humor forward where people can take part in this historic event in Canada and not have it dug into the ground and told that it's terrible and it's awful and it's horrible. I've had people tell me that, but but those aren't people who have bought the book. And I'm just happy we could contribute something that I've gotten a lot of emails from people that have said, it cast a light in their home in a dark time, that it brought laughter into their homes. And I've made great connections through this experience. Again, becoming friends with you and meeting Joe and your community, and even becoming friends with Tamara and the people I've met. Uh, Dr. Jordan Peterson. I mean, some of those folks have had some of the nicest things to say, and I keep telling them, look, I made a 35-page book that just had some jokes in them, and this, it's a little surreal how it's blown up, because that was never the plan. The plan was just, let's see if we can put something on the map and get some laughs. And it's been a wild ride for the last year.
You got a few others that came out afterwards. You've got the I just love the titles. They're hilarious. You got One Face, Two Face, Black Face, Blue Face. Tell us a bit about that. Is that so this one's going through all the different characters of the of Parliament, right?
Parliament Hill.
Amazing.
It was our follow up, because again, when How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom took off, and again, I just got onto Twitter, and there were people saying, do Jag Meat next, and do Gilbo and all these other guys. And I started going, well, I don't know who to pick, right? Because part of the problem was How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom was a start, and once I sat down with my illustrator and talked about making a company out of this and continuing to make other books. Because don't forget, she's 18 years of age. I didn't know if she wanted to continue doing this, or if it was a one-off. And when we discussed, forming Unacceptable Fringe and moving into a company, well, it was, well, who do we pick, and what do we do moving forward? And part of our roadmap was that we didn't want to be in a box with just politicians and always doing politics. We wanted to cover a lot of the culture wars. We wanted to cover a lot of the hot button issues that are going on, and things that some people don't want to talk about, that everybody's thinking about, that they just don't want to say. So I kind of said, well, let's do a follow-up book, and we'll just put everybody that we can in it and try to get some jokes in there. And I mean, a lot of people have told me they enjoy that one as well, that people were very receptive to it. And it was fun to put that out. But I'm looking forward to our new projects. We've got some good ones on the go that
any hints on what's coming?
Well, we're gonna do. I've already told people that we're tackling the grooming community next. That's
the grooming community. That's what they call it now. It's just
so we're gonna. Well, I'll just say groomers in general, but there's going to be a lot of familiar faces throughout the world, not just Canada. We're not just doing the odd person this time. We're getting all of them in this book. A lot of well-known folks are going to be caricatured in this book, and it's going to be I mean, we have to be creative on how we're putting it together, so that, again, we don't get shadow banned, that we don't seek any kind of pushback. So the book is going to involve a little boy and a little girl that are twins, and their names, it's going to be Riley and Vera. Riley and Vera Young, so really and very young, are going to be the main characters.
Okay, don't give away too much, because we want people to buy it.
So we're going to call it Riley and Vera's Guide to Grooming is going to be our next book.
Oh, that's funny.
It's, we're hoping to have it out by summer, so we'll see. Again,
nice.
With my illustrator being in college, we pushed out One Face, Two Face, and then also Hold the Line, the Ballad of Tamara Leach. We pushed out real quick for in time for the 1-year anniversary of the convoy. So I really threw a lot of work under her shoulders. So I told her, when it comes to Riley and Vera, we'll take our time with this one, because there's so many people I want to get in this book and cover jokes on. And while some people have said they've read my earlier books to their kids, I'm going to say right now, this is probably one you will not want to read to your children.
Right.
We're going to go a little spicier in this book, I think, and push some lines a little bit. So I'm really excited because I think that's part of my problem when it came to how the Prime Minister stole freedom. I told my wife, I tried to make something that, I was worried about censorship. I was worried about people saying it was too much if we went over some lines. And I said, I'm not giving people 100% of what I'm capable of. And she says, well, then why don't you do it? And I said, I'm worried about the repercussions of going 100%, but we're going to do that with this book. I think I'm going to go full bore on this one, and we won't pull any punches, but it's going to be interesting.
This is a scary one. This is a scary one, going after the grooming community, as you called it.
Well, I've taken such a proactive stance against the drag time story hours and things that are going on in town. I think I'll kind of put my money where my mouth is and call them out at the same time while I'm running my campaign by throwing out a book.
Okay, let's break that down. And get Joe in for this, of course. Whoops.
Sure.
So, first, I really, really liked that phrase you just used, Clyde. The grooming community singles out people regardless of their orientation as being the problem. Because it's not a rainbow thing. It is a certain mindset of people who are pushing these grooming issues.
Yes.
And many of them are straight.
Yeah.
And so
I got into this in my live
nails
stream last week, talking about the fact that like a lot of these drag queen dudes, like they're straight men, like a lot of them, and they're not. This isn't like it's. I feel like a lot of these issues get conflated and they get thrown into one camp, and then people, will say, "Oh, you see, they don't even understand what they're talking about," and fair point. A lot of people don't, and they don't care to really understand it. But you have to like kind of, at a certain point, you got to kind of get the memo on what's actually happening. So like the drag time story hour stuff is completely different from like the transgender thing that's going on. Which I think the gender, the multiple genders thing, I think is just it's an annoying thing because it's a misunderstanding on grammar, where it's a grammatical context. It's not a social context or construct. It's a construct in language. Things have sexes or they don't have sexes. The way you describe a noun could be with a gender, and that's the difference. So you have indeterminate, neuter, indeterminate, neuter, masculine and feminine. If you ask somebody what sex they are and they said feminine or masculine, you'd say you're confused. You're talking about genders, right? And these are things you can't identify. And I'm seeing. What did you post in there? A joke.
So I said that to my wife today because it kind of has to do with a little bit of this. It's I think it's basically because it's the LGBs, and then you've got the T plus on the other side.
Yeah. So and this is an interesting concept with the LGB thing. LGB, those are sexual orientations, and then everything else afterwards are ways of identifying, and those are completely different concepts entirely. And this is why the LGB are now going, nah, don't want it. No. But and you guys are sharing memes in here. Just
this one's real. It's not even a meme.
I can't show that.
It's just the state of things. I know.
I can't show that.
You can explain it though.
Well, it's naked people. Body positivity show has adults standing fully nude in front of children. Why?
Right? This is completely separate from the rainbow community. This is this groomer community.
So yeah, this is what I was trying to get at. So like there's nothing. I mean, it's up to you. if you want to engage in drag shows, they're not illegal. Drag shows they've been around for a long time. They're burlesque, like strip shows. They don't always
Some of
get
them are
total.
comedy shows.
They don't always get totally naked, but it's very sexually charged. They all are, and anyone who says they're not is that's just baloney. You're just lying, right? And and that's what they are, and they're over the top. They're starting to call it woman face because it's like it's actually a caricature making fun of women, and that's what they do. And it's not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. What's new is the idea of introducing it to children, which is very it's not a good concept because of the whole sexual charged part of it. And a lot of what ends up happening is people go to these things to protest against these drag story things, and then when they go,
unless you're in Calgary, you're not allowed.
well, Ontario as well now, we just found out.
Oh
Yeah, that just happened. They passed, or they're passing a thing where if you go within 100 is it 100 meters?
100-foot bubble.
100 meters. 100-meter bubble.
100 meters. That's what it is. Yeah.
If you go, I gotta pull this out. Joe, you said you look like you were gonna say something. I'll pull this tweet up. It blows my mind.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of a minstrel show where people will dress up in blackface to mock black people, but it's the misogynist version of it, which is really weird because you'd think the people most against misogyny would be against it, but that's the world we live in nowadays.
So
Well,
here we are. I got it. Dan Dix from Press for Truth put this up today. He says, "What the F? They're doubling down with a new bill criminalizing anyone who speaks out against transgender agenda with offensive remarks," in quotes, with a penalty of 25 grand if prosecuted. And they had this like this show. It's a show thing.
Circus.
It's crazy. They had all these people up here just to make this announcement, to which I replied, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but 25 grand will ruin you."
Yeah, there you go. That's a good sentiment, actually.
That should be their motto going forward. Like,
yeah,
and you really, honestly, you're not marginalized. The other quote, the other thing I said about it, I said when you tell your friends that you're marginalized, but the government will fine people 25 grand if they say mean words to you. It's like, what, you can't have it both ways. Is everybody sticking up for you, or are you marginalized? You know.
Can you just step back for a second and realize how beyond the pale this is? Like, imagine swapping in and the government was fining people $25,000 for criticizing white Christian males,
or criticizing God. If you blaspheme,
or any of those things, it's like not even third world countries are usually that bad.
But it is essentially like blasphemy laws, because it's really offensive to some religious people to take God's name in vain or things like that.
Right.
Or draw
part of the problem
of Muhammad.
Yeah, part of the problem in Calgary,
but it's free speech. It really is. It really comes down to that. Sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Well, you're no. I was just going to say you're censoring free speech, but it goes against the Charter of Rights. You're telling people you're not allowed. You're allowed to protest, but you're not allowed to protest within 100 meters of these events because these are our opinions. These are our views that we're offended that you're trying to protest against. Any other protest, you're allowed to do whatever you like. But when it comes to this, because it hurts people's feelings, 100 meters, you can't pick and choose. That's the big problem at the end of the day. It's either all or nothing. And it's when you talk to anybody in these situations, because again, when I took my announcement that I was running for mayor, the platform I started running on is I'm going to repeal this bylaw. I'm getting it out of there because the city has put forward a letter stating that if you enter any city property, so now in Calgary, all pools are city run. gymnasiums, any of that, gyms, like workout gyms, unless it's like, you know, World Health or whatever, or Gold's Gym. Um, when you enter there, if you just say, I feel like I'm a woman today, you can walk right into a female change room and watch people take their clothes off. Now, there's no vetting, there's no security done, there's no checks. Meaning a registered sex offender could come in wanting a free show and just says, "Oh, I'm going to follow those children into this dressing room," and in they go. There's no, they don't have to provide. It's a Pandora's box. It's the problem with this is that people are saying, "Well, you're phobic or you're judging people for being trans." No, we're not. This is somebody's kink. This is their sexuality, their sexualization that they're bringing into this. They're hijacking the LGBT portion of that community in order to feed their insatiable lust for children. They want access. And that was the one argumentative point that I had. I met with some folks from the LGBT community, and I sat down and said, would anybody be opposed to city run properties having a transgender change room or transgender washrooms within malls, within facilities, that you can have your own space if you want representation, if you want to feel like a part of things? Now, everybody that was in the LGBT community said, no problem. That's actually very considerate. People in the T side said, well, that's phobic and you can't say that. And they're getting outraged by it. And it's
Well,
like, well, that's
there's
the
a
problem.
legitimate issue right away, right off the bat.
You're not looking for a solution. You're looking for access.
Right.
Is the problem.
No, I get it.
Access.
And I understand the merits of like looking for an actual solution instead of just being, griping. But like right on the surface, there's an issue. You can't just have a trans room, because then what, trans women and trans men are going into the same room? It's like,
right, but what I'm saying is,
creates,
I wouldn't actually put that facility forward. It's trying to get to the bottom of what the problem is.
okay,
right?
okay,
And the problem isn't a matter of, well, I need my own space or I feel uncomfortable in these spaces. I know a guy I used to work with that has gone full transition, and he's transitioned to female. He's done the post-op, everything, but he still goes into the male change room at his gym and changes. He says he usually goes into like a stall or something and does it, but he's never advocated to go into a women's change room because he believes that it's morally wrong. And that is the difference, is that genuine trans don't see this as a problem. The people who want the access to the kids and that want to indoctrinate kids, that want to force their opinions onto kids and sway kids, are the ones that are doing this for a sexual nature usually, and not for the reasons of understanding or acceptance. It has to do with feeding their fetish, and that ultimately is the problem, is these parents that are being told you're phobic if you don't take your children to these things. I mean, somebody should be honestly calling Child Protective Services for those things. Now, consenting parents can take their kids to these events, but my question is why?
So
I
agree with you on the fact that some people are doing that. Like some people, like predators, are using this excuse to gain access to children. Just like they in the past, they used the churches and they used other places to gain access to children, which often becomes the whataboutism that I keep hearing. Like, well, the churches did it for a long time. Well, we should all get together and stop all the places where the predators want to go, and we should all be fighting this together and not, arguing amongst each other. But I do think that there's a genuine group of individuals that feel like they want to go into the gender of their choice, the sex of their, and I hate using gender because it's just it's a linguistic concept. People, because the people who are transitioning, they don't believe in the gender fluid thing, even though they might espouse it, because it's not fluid, it's binary. They're transitioning from one to the other and they want to go into the bathrooms of the other, right? Now, I think there's legitimate people that think that, well, in order for them to feel like they've gone through the whole thing, they should be able to access, because they pass enough, they appear to be like the other sex and all this other stuff. But that is to say that all of society needs to go through with this, and they're not asking the favor, right? Which is what should be the case. They should be saying, "May we please?" No, they're saying this is a right and we have to do it. And there's no,
Yes.
they're not, you know what I mean? And it's really it's all
So
just for them. It's just for their sense of feeling and
yes.
being and all this other stuff. I think people a lot of times traditionally would just like go use the the other bathroom, the one that's like a single one or whatever, if they were uncomfortable.
I think Dave Chappelle said it best in his stand-up when he was talking about this, where he says, "I'm willing to accept that you see yourself a male transitioned into a female. If you want me to call you a she," he says, "I will do that, not because I believe you are a she, but it's just polite." He says, "I don't want to be mean towards you," but he says, "I will do those things." But he says the question remains as to, while I acknowledge what you would prefer, how much am I supposed to participate in your vision of what
and
you're
all of
seeing,
society,
right?
how much does all of society, and should it be a politeness thing, which I agree with, and I agree with the whole politeness thing, but should people be forced to go along with this facade, this act that you're putting on? Because really it is what it is. Like, people feel like they're in the wrong body, but they're not physically in the wrong body. They're of the sex that they were born into, and that's that. Like, gone are the days that this all comes with affirmation therapy. Gone are the days of learning to accept what you are and be happy with the way that you are. You're encouraged to perform an act to fulfill the fantasy or delusion or illusion that you have in your mind. But how much of it is the responsibility of the rest of society to go along with this?
Yes, and
facade.
it's always been my policy to say, live your best life as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the drag story hours, when it comes to those things, again, consenting children, consenting parents, if that's what you want to do with your free time, I maybe don't understand it.
This again,
but
I think there's a conflation there. So the drag story stuff, and then the transgender people wanting to go into the washroom. I don't think drag queens are trying to go into women's washrooms. They're
No.
performers. They're doing a performance. They should
And
be
that's
performing
where
for adults, in my opinion. I don't think they should be performing for children.
Well, and that's where, and I agree with that. I wholeheartedly agree with that. What I think needs to happen in Calgary, what I would do is that it's not my position to tell people how to feel. And it's not in my position to tell people that they are not allowed to feel a certain way. But I do believe that if you were to do, say, Drag Time Story Hour, right? I would say we need to, rather than put away, no protest bylaws or that they're held in city spaces. Not everybody who pays taxes in the city for these facilities agrees with them being held in those spaces. I think that permits should be established for those shows, and that just like the Liquor Control Board, just like anything else, if they were to allow under 18-year-old children in there, that there is somebody there who is nonpartisan, who is enforcing the rules of their permit, i.e., the people must be clothed. If it's just a man in a dress reading to children, okay, that's a little weird. But if you want to take illegal. Your kids to that,
yeah, it's not illegal,
right? It's not illegal. So what I'm saying is they'd have to have a permit where they're supervised at those events, and they would have to sell tickets to those events and do them in private facilities, not city-run facilities. And again, this alludes back to the same discussion of, what if we gave you your own change room? What if we gave you this? And they freak out. The people who get mad at those things, if people genuinely just said, I just want to dress in drag and go read stories to kids, those people would probably be okay with a permit. Those people would be okay with a set of rules. As soon as you see people losing their mind over that, that tells you that this is running deeper than reading stories to children, that it's their intentions are not in line with your best interests of your children. The biggest problem I have is when you look at the CBC documentary that had the kids sitting in front of the drag queens, you could see the awkwardness on those children.
It's weird, man.
And it was very weird and very cringe. But the thing is that the child's brain cannot comprehend what they're looking at. They can't justify what they're seeing. because their mind is developing. And as much as you tell people this is what they like to do, this is their hobby. Again, there's a lot of drag queens that are straight. We're not saying that all of them are gay. It's just something they enjoy doing. But exposing children to it at a young age when their mind is developing, I would feel is no different than exposing them to alcohol or exposing them to pornography or
Yes,
exposing
going
them
taking
to
a kid to a strip club. It's not right. You
yeah.
don't do that.
So, and that's one of the things that I've always fought back with is said, well, a lot of people put stripper poles in their houses and say, I get workouts, doing these pole dancing things. What if we used city run properties to have, since strippers spend a lot of time on poles, what if we hired a bunch of strippers to go do child pole dancing classes in the city? And there would be outrage immediately. And that's the problem, is that one is seen as bad and one is seen as phobic if you don't accept it. It's how far are we willing to go before we draw a line and say, this is what's appropriate for children, this is what's not. And that to me is the line in the sand.
I do like the idea of the pushing it into the private institutions. They don't even need to be paid for access. I'm sure lots of these groups have enough funding that they could pay for
they
their
get
own
sponsors.
thing. It's fine.
Yeah.
And yeah, that would reduce the thought that you're forcing a percentage of the population who is completely against it to have their income go towards supporting this. And that's the biggest issue there.
But in terms of a permit, that permit would say, again, if it's a man in a dress just reading to kids, this is allowed. If it's a man in a thong walking around dancing and twerking for kids, that is not permissive. No sexualization is permitted within this show. There's nothing sexual to be talked about in these shows. The books are to be family appropriate books, right?
Yeah.
Like those kind of things would need to be laid out in whatever bylaw you put forward for this permit. Just the same as if you get a liquor license at a wedding and they say you're not allowed to serve to minors, you're not allowed to serve between these hours, there's stipulations to those permits. And that's what I think. If they're so determined to have that, then there's your permit. These are the rules to it. And we have somebody enforcing that permit on site at all these events. The events must be registered or they're shut down. You're fined, possibly jailed. And people are allowed to protest outside. I'm sorry. That's everybody's God-given right. If I was running outside tomorrow in a Speedo, I'd expect a lot of people outside my house saying, you're making the kids ask a lot of questions, Mr. Smith. And if they wanted to protest outside my house, that's their God-given right. So
personally,
I don't agree with
I don't think it's
down.
in good taste. Like, in my opinion,
no,
I don't think going to these events and then protesting the people who are participating in these events with the kids there and all that stuff, it just creates a scene. I think a lot of the media, they love this because they're like, hey, look at these hillbillies. They
love the drama.
Yeah, look at these hillbillies doing their thing, and they'll throw a bunch of name calling. There's a bunch of name calling. Anyway, if you really feel strongly about it and you want to protest it, I would encourage people to go to the police department and say, hey, there's get out there and do your job. There are children that are being exposed to sexual stuff. It's against the law. And if the police go there and determine that it is within their purview to either shut it down because it is adult entertainment for in the viewing vicinity of children, then that should be a thing. Other than that, I mean, I remember when I was younger, there would be all ages shows. They couldn't sell alcohol. There were a bunch of limitations, and if they were at a community center, they wouldn't even allow swearing in the music, right? So there was stuff like that, and I don't see much of a difference. I think it's really weird that people want to bring their kids to a drag show, but that's it. At the end of the day, it is free speech, as long as it's not actually sexual in nature. The origins of it is sexual in nature, so that's why it's really creepy and weird. But yeah, if they've turned it into something that's not sexual, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing video after video after video on the internet of children with like people stripping in front of them. Like it's
all right. So I'm gonna put a little bit of devil's advocacy here when it comes to the bathroom thing, though.
Which we need to make
I'm
sure
gonna
we
first,
get this. Is these are separate issues, like the whole drag
yeah,
thing,
Yeah.
they're
and then
completely separate.
yeah,
Now for the transgender people in the bathroom, first this isn't part of the devil's advocate. It's realizing the demographics of what people are actually supportive of this. A very small percentage of the community is actually trans, and an even smaller portion of the trans community specifically is supportive of the weird bathroom shit. The vast majority of people supporting these kind of weird bathroom things are straight people, let's just
Yep.
say. And they white knight for the trans community, and specifically the thoughts that you're competing against in their heads are along the lines of trans people have issues with themselves in that this what identity that they have, and then going forth and then not allowing them to be in a specific bathroom. Every time that they're forced not to be there, it ends up being another thing that reminds them that no, they're not actually what they claim to be. And
Right.
that's the idea of the people who are supporting this weird push. And I
So
don't know how I can bridge an idea to connect with these people or some sort of compromise or anything, because they're not ever going to compromise on the idea of, yeah, it's okay if you violate the affirmation or something. I don't know.
mhm.
I think I know where it's leading, and I see it a
Mhm.
lot in public restrooms when it comes to restaurants and other places that people patronize. People they're going away from shared accommodating, like shared accommodation for
Individuals.
yeah, it's going into individual restrooms. They're just restrooms. They're unisex. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Whatever you
Yeah.
are, you go into it. You do your business.
Mhm.
It's a not political space because it's one person at a time,
Mhm.
and that's I think ultimately that's the way forward with this. And there's always like a practical business solution for it, and it usually comes in out of the free market, out of people just making do because they just don't want to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
At
Right.
the end of the
I,
day.
I think that's the only solution that works.
Well, and that's where it goes back to what I was saying with Dave Chappelle is that how much am I supposed to participate in your vision of this? It's if 90% of the people, just like what I said with the city, with being in city run buildings with drag time story hour and people saying, I don't agree with my taxes paying for these buildings where these things, because like you said, if they're religious, it's blasphemous, right? So
Mhm.
they have the right to say that. Just like if a a fully transitioned man to a woman was going into a woman's bathroom, why should anybody have to tell a woman who is against going into that bathroom out of fear, out of let's just call it being uneducated, out of a misunderstanding, or saying, I don't want to go into a bathroom with someone who used to be a man and pee next to them. Like, right, like they have the right to feel that way too, just like they say, well, we have the right to be understood. You have to respect the person's opinion that doesn't want to go in there with you while you're in there. And it's the same thing as to why, like I said, like it's a slippery slope that when you look at sports and you look at men competing as women in order to break records and smash records in order to matter in sports when they can't compete with their own gender. We've seen it in weightlifting. We've seen it in different Olympic events. We've seen it in swimming. Um, you've opened a door where it's limitless. And Piers Morgan did a great interview where he said, if you're going to do all those things, he says, what's stopping me from saying I'm a black lesbian?
Yeah.
And the lady said, well, you can't say that because you're making a mockery out of it. And he says, well, no, if you're saying it's limitless, and that's the problem is that when you make it limitless, you could essentially say that anything is negative towards somebody else or that you must give in to somebody's feelings. There needs to be a line where it's a line of, regulation where they say you're allowed to transition, you're allowed to feel this way, but we're not going to make everybody else feel a certain way one at a time in the bathroom.
Let
Like that's
yeah. Let's stop pretending that women care about who they pee next to. It's not about that. What it
Well-
is about is it's a vulnerable place for women, because it's a place
Yes.
that's outside of security cameras. It's outside of any sort of surveillance, security. It's a vulnerable place where they go to do their business, and it is a place where predators are looking to get into. And it is,
Yes.
and this is, it's not unheard of, right? It's
No.
not outlandish to say that men have taken advantage of this situation to for predation, and that's what they've done. And yes,
Well, it happened in the U.S. at a prison, right?
yeah,
There
well,
was a man who-
it happened in Scotland recently, where a man,
Yeah.
you know, convicted of struggle snuggles, went in to try to get into the women's prison, and
Yeah.
they actually denied him. They said, no,
Good.
we're going to give you a separate place. So you got like solitary or something like that. But yeah, no, if I mean, it's just, yeah, it's this dance and people pretending they say the nice words, but at the end of the day, it really is, women don't care about who they're peeing next to. They care about being assaulted, and that's the issue. And I don't care if you feel like you're sad because people aren't accepting you for the thing that you say that you are. It's about the safety of real women.
And anybody, I would think, that's making that decision, whether it's a transition or a different identity, would probably, if they're realistic with themselves, would understand why a woman might feel that way. And that's the problem, is that you're being told, I hear the argument constantly, well, if you're straight and you are asked out by a trans woman, you're phobic if you say no. No, it just means that doesn't interest me. It doesn't mean that I'm phobic. It means they have a preference. I have a different preference. I'm allowed to have that preference. And that's part of the problem, is you're told that if it goes against this community, you're not allowed to have a difference of opinion. And that is the problem, is that they're the only ones with the opinion and everybody else is wrong. And that's,
Did you hear
can't
about
run a
super?
society like that.
Did you hear about Super Straight?
Super straight? Yes.
Yeah.
So where that came from, for anyone who's listening to know, it was this thing
Was
that
it a
came out of
TikTok video?
well, it came out of the gay community, because the gay and lesbians, they wanted to, because this whole thing, like, if you're gay, you should like men even if they were born a woman, and they're like, no.
Yeah.
And the lesbians were
That's
like,
how it works.
no, I'm not gonna date a chick that has a penis, because it's not the thing. So they came up with this concept called super gay and then super lesbian, which meant it supersedes like whatever transition or whatever. And they actually accepted that for a while, right? So they accepted that as like a preference. Like, okay, well, this is, because the LGB was all about sexual preference. Okay, so they had super gay, super lesbian, and that was like, okay, that was accepted. So people were like, well, can I be super straight? Like straight
And
is
people
the
lost their minds.
Oh, people lost it. They're like, no, you're not allowed to be straight and not, like transgenders. And it's like, well, get off it. But it was funny because they were claiming to be part of the LGBT community as super straights, which was really, really funny.
Yeah.
It's an endless topic. It can go on forever.
Absolutely.
But and I just think that people, out of politeness, keep dancing around the topic and not saying exactly what it is. But then also, these things get conflated, like the whole transgender and then the drag. Those are completely separate issues. And
Absolutely.
And I think here's one thing that I was thinking about that kind of made me laugh. And it's like, and this has been happening for a long time. It happened with gay marriage and all this stuff, where the left really pushes some new queer thing, or I say queer because it's just like strange thing in society, a new novel idea. They push it on everybody, and then people who just like want to live a quasi traditional lifestyle are left with the conundrum of coming up with moralizing it. So the left is just like, we're gonna do it. We don't have morals, whatever. Here, go with it, and then I'm not sharing that, Joe. It's a picture of a bunch of penises on a page. What does it say? 98% of straight men refuse to perform
You don't
oral
want to show it, Clyde? Are you
sex with
phobic? Is that
98% of men refuse to perform oral sex with a feminine penis due to their bigotry and hatred of trans women and genital-based bigotry. Your sexual orientation may be transphobic. Get out of here.
Clyde's phobic? Clyde's phobic.
But at the end of the day, that's probably a pretty close statistic. 98% are not
That's
open.
so funny. But yeah, so like
Yeah, no.
all of this gets pushed out there, and then it's up to people in the center or right to actually come up with the moral philosophy and actually figure it all out. And it went that way with gay marriage, and it was just like, no, everyone's having gay marriage. We're like, but wait, no, what? When did that happen? And then everybody had to figure out the morality behind it. I tend to have a libertarian sort of stance behind it. I don't think the government should be involved in marriage. And if churches want to do gay marriage, they can do it. If they don't want to do it, they shouldn't be forced to do it. That's my stance. But you know, we have what we have, and that's what got put through in legislation anyway.
Yeah.
We'll see where this whole thing ends up. But we have been going for just about 2 hours now on this podcast. And Derek, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And well,
Thanks.
I really appreciate it. And having Joe in for the whole chat this time instead of just being in the background is a fun treat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always fun to talk with Joe.
Yeah, for sure. Good luck. And how can people support you on your journey to become mayor of Calgary?
They can mail a check for $1 million to.
Oh, okay.
No, it's a.
So you are accepting of money.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Well, you will have to at some point.
Eventually, we'll have to fundraise at some point because it's part of the requirements to run for mayor. But well, you can't self fund your campaign. But what I would really encourage people to do is follow me on Twitter if you haven't already at Unaccept Fringe. Anything I'm going to be doing in this mayoral race will always be posted on there. I'm also trying to build my online community so that we can get the message out. We can make things go out when they have to. So if you're not already on my YouTube channel, head over to Unacceptable Fringe and subscribe. And I do weekly live streams on there where I talk about things that, you know, like the mayoral run and policy and different things. And I also take questions from viewers. So anybody who's got questions for me or wants to ask away, feel free. Again, like I said, I don't block on Twitter anymore now that I've learned about the mute button. So nobody has to be worried or fearful of being blocked. But I also put out some good content that I think people would enjoy. But the more numbers we can get, the idea in this campaign is to get people off their rears and interested in voting. And I think that if we can build up a larger community that really pushes that message home, I think we stand a good chance of taking that seat. So we'll see where we end up.
I like it. Well, I'm hoping the best for you, and we're hoping it happens sooner than later. Come on, let's get that recall.
The big question, Clyde, the big question is, if I take that seat, are you going to move out to Alberta?
There's no guarantees.
Come on.
There's no.
Not even if I give you a job.
That's nepotism, man. I like my job.
See, here's where we start talking about guys who want kickbacks. That's no, I'm kidding.
No, I like my job. I like where I'm at.
I would not encourage politics on anybody, so no, I would not recommend.
Would it be nepotism if it was social media manager?
That's a good question.
No.
Clyde could probably handle trolls a lot better than I can.
You could use somebody running your social media, Derek. All
right. I know. I've made a lot of mistakes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. And we're going to end this now.
Good. Thank you for having me.
Definitely check out Derek. Go check him out on social media. Follow him on Twitter. Get that audience going big. And then as soon as we can, we'll get the donations out to his campaign and get that started.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Good night, everybody.
Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Like and subscribe.